words, that these words had some kind of miraculous, magical power to curse. And then when he heard that Balaam was actually blessing, remember he kept trying to get him to stop, because why? He thought there was some power in these words, right? Like they're incantations or something. And we talked a little bit about that last week, the idea of not incantations, but similarly, the idea of spells or the idea of curses, or where people are, I've talked about a witch's coven that said that they put a curse on someone. I can't remember who it was, some public figure, and it was probably Donald Trump. I'm sure it was, but they called upon the powers that be to curse his life. And if he's smart, he'd just laugh it off because it doesn't mean anything. They're just words, right? Now, there is great power in words that we say, but there is a limit to that power. And it's certainly not that kind of power that we have, right? So how did he succeed? In what ways did he succeed? I'm talking about Balak, wanting to curse Israel. In what ways did he succeed? Yeah, he got them to commit sin. And that's the only way that he had any impact on the culture or on the people of Israel, because he got them to sin. And of course, this is what he learned from Balaam, but the actual work that Balaam did, it wasn't going to matter. It wasn't going to amount to anything either way, no matter what he said. God's the one who's in control of who is blessed and who is cursed. And cursing simply means, I think, in my understanding of a curse, it simply means that things will go wrong for us because we're in the wrong path. And sometimes, we all have these jokes. I thought it was just our family, but I've met several families that believe that they have a family curse, right? We call it the Sparks curse. Part of the Sparks curse is that if I try something that's going to take me 10 minutes, it's going to take me 3 hours. That's our curse, right? And so we have these kind of figures of speech, but I don't necessarily believe that that's a curse, not in a legitimate, literal sense. It's just how things happen, right? But anyway, he tried to do that, and it didn't work, and now he's successful in causing all kinds of death because of the sin that he encouraged his people to engage with Israel on. Okay, now if you look in Numbers 25, this is when all these things happened with the harlotry, and it says the people began, in verse 1, the people began to commit harlotry with the women of Moab. They invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So we got evil influence around, which did a lot more than some man's words spoken on top of a mountain, or much more than what they could do. And Israel was joined to Baal of Peor, and in verse 3, the anger of the Lord was aroused against them. And then God tells Moses to take the leaders and hang the offenders before the Lord out in the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, every one of you kill his men who were joined to Baal of Peor. So now this is the death penalty. Why was it such a strict penalty? There's two reasons. There's an obvious answer, and then there's maybe a reason behind the answer. What do you think? Yeah, that would be the reasoning behind the reason. So that others would see and understand, and also to cleanse Israel of the sin that had been committed and the seriousness of that. I mean, if God is going to have... Do you remember what happened to the man who was caught on the Sabbath day picking up sticks? They stoned him to death. If they're going to stone him to death for that, you can imagine that he's going to do at least that for people who are out committing harlotry and, in the process of that, worshiping other gods. So there's spiritual and physical harlotry going on. And so God's going to punish. All right? And the simple answer to that is God said, if you do this, you're going to die. And he told them that. And they still went out and did these things. It's almost as if they wanted to see, hey, is it really going to be that bad? Or you can imagine how people we justify things in all kinds of ways. Nobody will know, or everyone else is doing it, so maybe God's not that in control as we think He is, but He is. Okay, so in Numbers 25, we have then these situations that are going on, and how did it really stop? That'd be starting in verse 7. The famine, the plague was stopped in verse 8. So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. So Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, saw this couple go into a tent, and he went in after them. And in fact, in verse 6 it says, one of the children of Israel came and presented to his brethren a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So here they are. They were weeping because of what? Because the recognition of sin, and also because of the recognition of what they're going to have to do now to cleanse. Now, there are going to be lots of death, and up walks this man doing what everyone else was doing. And so when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose from among the congregation, took a javelin in his hand, went in after the man of Israel into the tent, and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her body. So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. And those who died in the plague were 24,000. So he did a lot. Now, statistically, 24,000 out of 3 or 4 million is not a huge amount of people, but it still had a huge impact because the message was very clear. This does not happen. Okay, so the question in number 5 is, why was Phinehas's zeal in killing the idolatrous Israelites approved by God? Yeah. So God had already ordained, what were they supposed to do to the people? Yeah, well, actually, they're supposed to take all these people and hang them in daylight so everybody can see, right? And you're going to assume that there's going to be some kind of a measure. What was the process for putting someone to death? Had to have 2 or 3 witnesses. Yeah. Right, and this is actually, I don't remember if it's here or later we see who it was. This is actually one of the leader's children, sons, who was doing this. Okay, so there was not the same kind of due process. There was definitely the 2 or 3 witnesses, but there wasn't like a court trial or anything like this. I don't have any idea if they're going to hang these people if they had some kind of a court proceeding. It doesn't say. But there was some kind of message. Right. But I'm talking about in the process of killing them, did they have to have the 2 or 3 witnesses come up and say, yes, I saw them do this? Or did he just say, I'm sure it wasn't just, go get everybody that you think did it and let's hang them on a tree somewhere. That's not what he said. So there was some kind of a process, and Phinehas, did he follow the strict letter of the law, so to speak, in how he did what he did? No. So why would God be approving of that? It seems almost like it's, what is that when you take justice in your own hands? Vigilante. Right. Oh yeah, and he was.
Verse 5, Moses says, each of you slay his men who join themselves to Baal of Peor. This man had clearly done it.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is God told them how to kill them. Take them out and hang them in a tree in the open in the daylight. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, it could be that this is, somebody had to start the process, right? Yeah. Where other people were just sitting around crying about it, he was like, oh, we're going to take action. That's valid. I'm not trying to be argumentative or say that he did anything wrong. I just want to think through, why didn't he follow the process? Yeah. True. How does yours read? How, how does yours read? Oh, well, see, mine doesn't say that. Mine says take all the leaders and hang them.
Mine just says same with the leaders and execute.
Yeah.
Good old human.
Yeah. So I mean, head could be literal head or a figurative head, right? I guess you have to.
Number D in the Strong says the chief, the head of man, city, nation, place, family, race.
Yeah, I don't know if the word is any different if it's used figuratively or not. Yeah, Adam? Well, mine says, take all the leaders of the people and hang the offenders before the Lord. That seems to be showing means.
In other words, it says hang them before the Lord. I mean, that would be before or after death. You mean hang them as the means to kill them.
Oh, I see. You're saying that it may not be, may kill them and then hang them before the Lord out in the sun. And the idea was that you need to, however it happened, I guess that's a good point. It could have been that way. So however it happened, these people are going to be hung, and who were they going to be hung before? The Lord, right? Not that he didn't know, but this is going to be out in the open. Everyone else will be able to see, and he's looking, and God can look at this, and he can cease from killing the people, from the fierce anger. All right, good. So maybe there is a lot more to that. And he goes in, and he's killing, and there's another important idea here. Who was Phinehas?
Son of Eleazar.
Okay, and who is Eleazar? Okay, so he's a priest, Aaron's son. May have been high priest, I can't remember. So we have the high priest, his son. What kind of authority does he have? Does the high priest have in the community? I mean, lots, right? Yeah. So they are important people, and this had to start. So when I read verse 4, the Lord said, take all the leaders of the people and hang the offenders. I look at verse 5, and he says, Moses said to the judges of Israel. Who are the judges? These are the leaders of the people, right? And we see that obviously in the book of Judges. It had changed by then. But remember that he had set up divisions of the thousands and the hundreds and the tens, and then it says that he also set up judges of Israel, so I'm assuming it's more broad. So now he's going to the leaders and saying, you guys start the killing process. Does that tell us anything about how sin should be rooted out? Where does it start? It should start from the leadership, right? And it must, if it's going to be effective, it's going to have to be from the leadership that goes. So I think that's an important idea here too. So Phinehas or Phineas, however you want to say it, I think it's Phinehas. And well, probably both explanations are wrong, but the important thing here is that we see him taking action, and that he went and took a javelin, he killed these people, and it says, so the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. Now, the plague had already started working. This is a quick-acting plague, right? 24,000 people had already died from this. And it doesn't say time frames, how long this was going on, but it went on long enough for people to start dying from a plague. All right, any thoughts, any other thoughts about this? Can you see any other principles of justice or judgment? Yeah. Go ahead.
I noticed that the woman that was killed
Yeah, she was a leader. Yeah, she was the leader's daughter. That's right. And that's actually verse 15, isn't it? The Midianite woman who was killed was Cosby, the daughter of Zur. He was the head of the people of the father's house in Midian, of a father's house in Midian. And in fact, in verse 14, the Israelite who was killed was Zimri, the son of Salu, a leader of a father's house among the Simeonites. So here are two leaders getting together. And that has broader implications as well, right? Yeah.
So I don't remember the Midianites being part of that destruction when they go into Canaan, but I do remember that Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite. So does this have to
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't know.
I don't remember if there was anything else significant about them that I thought was interesting. They must have been in that area.
Yeah, and also we know that it's not was Balak a Midianite? Well, he saw what they did to the Amorites in chapter 22 and verse 2. Doesn't Moab said to the elders of Midian. Oh, okay, so he probably was then. Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of the Moabites at that time. So there was a union there, I guess. All right. Right.
And to me, it's just God saying, right, you gotta do something, it's knowing that it should have been done a long time ago, and we wouldn't have 2,000 years.
Right. It shouldn't have ever happened to begin with. Yeah. And so him standing up and stopping it. That's right. And that brings up a question I'll bring up in just a second. Yeah.
Verse 6, I think has to bear in mind because this is done in front of all the people. So he's bringing them right into the camp. They don't seem to be going over and eating and doing other things. It seems like it was outside the camp. This one has no shame
Yeah.
to bring it into the camp, and I think that plays into it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. The boldness of this coming in. And it says, presented to his brethren is what mine says. I don't know if he went around bragging about it, but he was not trying to hide anything. He's pretty proud of it. May have even thought this would be a good way for us to have, some goodwill between the countries. I don't know what they're thinking, but interesting. So what is the difference between killing and murder? I know it's an obvious question. Is there a difference? And it says, thou shalt not kill. It actually should be translated differently. Yeah. And no, I can kill intentionally and still not murder.
Is one legally sanctioned and one not?
One is legally sanctioned and the other one is illegal. Right. It's authorization. So when you look around, so the reason that we can kill murderers is because God has sanctioned that the government can kill murderers, right? So when he says it's okay, that's not murder. Murder is the intentional killing of someone that is an illegal killing. It's not allowed to be killed. And there are certain people that God said, these are people who should be killed. They're people who are well, there are a lot of people in the Old Testament, but primarily, especially what goes into the New Testament, was the people who murdered. Their life was required of them, right? That was what it said. Pedophiles were the same way, kidnappers were the same way, homosexuals the same way in the Old Testament. There were lots and lots of people in the Old Testament that were up for murder, up for the death penalty, but it was not murder to kill them because it's authorized. And this gets into a lot of discussion and debate about, situations where governments come in and take over. If one government comes in and takes over land and the other one comes in and takes over the land and they keep going back and forth, how do you know which one is really the one that's the authority and there's all kinds of strange debates that come up. But we need to remember that just because Phinehas killed does not mean that Phinehas did anything wrong. He actually did something that was right. And so not all death is wrong. Okay, we're going to move ahead a little bit here to chapter 27, unless there's any other comment. Chapter 27, starting in verse 15, this is when Moses goes to God and asks him to appoint someone who would go out and lead the congregation because he knows he's not going to be there. And in fact, in the end of verse 17, it says that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep which have no shepherd. Okay, now, who is the shepherd of Israel? Depends on how you look at it, right? Is it Moses at this point, or what about God? Yeah, certainly. And so what is the difference between what Moses did and a king? It's an interesting question, isn't it? God told Moses what to do. True. Well, certainly. Would the successor of Moses have the same kind of luxury as Moses had with the face-to-face communication? So Joshua didn't have that kind of interaction. No. No one else did. So when we're talking about appointing someone, it's interesting that we know what happened whenever they asked for a king. What was God's reaction? He gave them one, but he was upset about it, right? And Samuel was upset. And God said, don't worry about them. They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. Well, why did they reject? Why did he say they rejected him? Okay, I think it has to do with the fact that they looked around and saw all these people, all these other nations, they all have kings, so we need a king. And so the question comes up, what is the difference between what a king could do and what Moses could do? That's what it usually comes to, doesn't it? Well, now didn't Moses tax them? Yeah. That's right. So Samuel even gave warning, right? I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but Samuel gave warning. This is what a king is going to do. So it's all in the mind, really. The way you think of a king is not the way you think of a shepherd. And so a king becoming a king, he's the leader, we think, well, he's going to do whatever he wants to do. Well, couldn't Moses pretty much do whatever he wanted to do? I mean, he had pretty well control of the situation. Yeah, but can't a king have the interest of the people? True, and that's also the case for kings. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I mean. So it's all mindset. It's how you see the title, right? So if you saw David as he was the chief shepherd, would it be as much of a problem as saying he's the king? I don't know. Okay, it's based on a relationship.
Because Moses had that connection. He would actually inquire with the Lord. And David, to some degree, for a good portion, then perhaps a little bit of Solomon, but then there's a great deviation afterwards.
Yeah, they definitely go to the wayside after Joshua. So it's just an interesting thought to me to think about how we use language and things like this. The point is that they were asking, or Moses was asking for a shepherd. He wasn't asking for them to have a king. And there is a difference. And although, if you look at the behavior of Joshua, what did he do? He led them to battle. He gave them commands. He told them how they're going to live and enforce what God's laws are, which was what a king was going to do to begin with. But it had already... There's a difference in the way we perceive it. And I believe that that's one of the reasons that we need to be careful, perhaps, with the terminology that we use in talking about other people, right? So that's one of the reasons that I reject the term pastor. It's not just because it doesn't apply to me, but also because that concept, the connotation of that, we've joked about it whenever James and Don and I would sit together before they became elders, because I was in the process of becoming one as well. And one of the things that we talked about a couple of times was the fact that we joked that I would be called a pastor, legitimately then. And we joked about it, but then I recognized in my mind that wasn't going to happen, because the connotation of the word is different now than it was back then. Yeah.
Even though you say that, to many people are pastors.
I know.
Wrongly thinking that way, but they
Right.
don't place you in it because of the common denominator.
Because of the common way of thinking about it. So is it unfair to look at, from a practical perspective, is it unfair to look at Joshua as a somewhat of a king? Not really. But it's improper because he wasn't called a king, right? He wasn't a king. The only reason he wasn't a king is because he wasn't called one. He had pretty much all the power of a king, because any king, if they walked away from God, they were going to be punished. It may take them 40 years to be punished, but they would be punished. And Joshua couldn't do that either. So anyway, that's not the question. Let me get to the question. What qualified Joshua to lead Israel after Moses? God's choice. True. Is that it? He was Moses. Oh, yeah. You see him from even when they left Egypt. You see Joshua's name being pulled up, and he's a leader. He has recognition among the people. It's obvious that God gave him the authority, and God has a right to appoint whoever he wants to. But if you think about it, God doesn't usually pick someone to be a leader who is just a nobody, who has never done anything, and just say, hey, I'm going to make you a leader. He did that in one instance. Do you remember who that was that he did that with? Saul. The only reason he picked Saul was what? He was tall. I mean, that was pretty much it. He was not a leader. He was, in fact, when he went to his inauguration, they couldn't find him. Where was he? He was hiding. He didn't want any part of that. He was scared. So it's interesting how how he chooses people, and it's based on relationship, it's based on abilities, talents, these kinds of things. And which is better for you in your thinking? And so really, I don't mean to insult you with such a simple question, but it's just a thought question. Which is better for us to choose leaders who are leaders, or to choose leaders who are not leaders? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? We find the people who are leading, and that's who we follow. That's going to naturally happen. People naturally follow leaders. That's the way it works. Yeah.
Remember back in Exodus 17, Joshua had already fought as the leader against the Amalekites, and they were holding up Moses' arms.
Right. Yeah. From the early on, he's one of the ones holding up Moses' arms. No, he was down fighting. You're right. Because Aaron and some other man were holding up his arms. Yeah, he was in the leading.
That came out and said we can take
There's another point.
the land, and they were the only two of that whole generation that lived.
Yeah.
So he had the eldership.
It's interesting when God said he gave them the pronouncement of 40 years of wandering. He said that Caleb was going to be the exception. He's going to go in. But also later on we found out it's also Joshua, right? And so at first Joshua wasn't even mentioned. Maybe it was assumed, I don't know. But Joshua and Caleb were the only two of that whole generation that made it to the Canaan's land. That says something about the man's character as well, correct? We can see it also related to the other one. But so did that have any impact on God's decision of him being a shepherd? Of course it did. It has to. And God can help anyone. When Joshua took over in command, what was his attitude or mindset about it? Okay, that's true. He said that at the end of Joshua. But at the beginning of the book, what did God say to him? Don't be afraid. In fact, he said it several times in the first chapter. Do not be afraid, I'm with you. Do not be afraid, I'm with you. So would that imply that Joshua was a little bit intimidated? How would you not be intimidated by taking over what Moses had done and trying to fill the shoes of Moses? That would be a pretty big undertaking. And it's going to take a unique person to be able to do that. We all know how it is to fill someone else's shoes. You can't fill someone else's shoes. You have to put your own shoes on. But you still have some expectations from the previous guy in looking at that. Any other thoughts? How was the leadership transition handled in this section? All right, he stood before Eleazar in verse 21, who shall inquire of the Lord for him by the judgment of the Urim. At his word they shall go out, and his word. Oh, I'm sorry, that's for what he's going to be doing. Let's back up here. He's going to set him before Eleazar the priest in verse 19, and before the whole congregation, and inaugurate him in their sight. Inaugurate is mine. It's commission him is what footnote says. Anyone have a different translation? What's he going to do? Yes, he did lay his hands on him, and that's the way that he commissioned him, right? That was practiced even 1,000 years later when the apostles were laying hands on people. They were commissioning them for a service. Incidentally, we shouldn't discount the fact that we're talking about the same people, right? The same culture. Even though it's been 1,000 years, they still had some of the same practices. So I don't believe that's necessarily a universal characteristic that if we're going to appoint someone to something, we got to lay our hands on them. It's just the way they did it, and they did it for a long time. But is it wrong to do it that way? No. How does the Bible tell us that we should inaugurate elders, for example? There's nothing there about it. It just says, but wouldn't things like this imply that it should be done, right? What's the end result of this process of Moses laying his hands on Aaron and speaking words? Yeah, in fact, God said to him, let's see here, let me find it. Not always, but yeah. But it was. That's how they did it. Somebody said verse 20, you're right. It says, you shall give some of your authority to him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. All right. What does that mean, that you're going to give some of your authority to him? Yeah, right. And it'll be, in giving that, it wasn't, I don't mean this in a sacrilegious way or anything, but it wasn't like Moses put his hand above his head and there's lightning striking his head. He's giving authority, right? Although I can imagine with the apostles giving the Holy Spirit, I don't think it was lightning, but there was some kind of a visual sign of it. Maybe it's because they started speaking in tongues or whatever. That's not necessarily what's going on here. But he gives him some of the authority. How does a person give authority to someone else? It wasn't just by laying his hands, it's by the words that he says, right? These are things everyone needs to hear and recognize. Joshua's not usurping. He's not doing anything underhanded. We're all upfront about this. The leadership that I have is now being transferred to him. And if you don't like it, take it up with me because I'm the one that gave it to him. That's kind of the idea. Yeah, I saw a hand over here. I'm sorry. Yeah, Linda? Okay, yeah, to give high esteem and honor, which is exactly what was happening, right? Good. That's a good point. Yeah. Yes. Yes. And it's a good point because as Moses is still alive, Joshua isn't the one who's leading still. Moses is still the one, but also there's a transitionary period. And that implies that when Moses is gone, Joshua is there. He takes the place. And of course, this is what kings have done for millennia. And I don't know if that practice was in place when this happened or if that practice came because of this happening. I don't know, but it is interesting how it works. All right. Any other thoughts? Why is it important for him to have that kind of inauguration point? It's a ceremony. Why is that important? Yeah. We're kind of making it official. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's a good point.
So it's like you can't just Moses suddenly die and then like
Yeah. So in this kind of in a sense it's a dictatorial relationship where Moses speaks and they listen and do. So in a sense it is. And when you have when Moses dies, there's a power vacuum. And with power vacuums, nature does not like vacuums. What happens when there's a power vacuum? People fight to fill the vacuum. And we've all seen that happen in various times. I've actually, it went well, but I saw that happening here. Even before we had elders, we had situations in which we had some important people move, and there was a hole. And then it was interesting because there was a time where it was almost that some of the men were at each other's throats a little bit, and it wasn't because of animosity. It was because they're trying to assert, no, this is how we need it. No, this is how we need it. And so it's a natural process where if they would have left and said, I'm going to assign this to so and so, it would have been a lot easier. But they didn't have the authority to do that. They just left, and there was a hole. And when there's a hole, there's always people that would try to fill it, and there's always headbutting, right? Because they rush in to try to fill it because they're trying to help. So, and that's the best case scenario. In a worst case scenario, we have people that will cut and stab and fight and undercut other people so they can have the power. That certainly wouldn't happen here, but it could happen there. It's a dangerous situation. So it just makes sense. What kind of application we see here? We can be kind of applying that already as we've been talking about it. Did you see any other application for it? Or did we kind of cover it all? Yes, there was a... What word? Urim. Oh, it's the Urim and the Thummim and it's two things. We don't know what they were, but there were two items that they were used to, when priests were inquiring of God, they would roll this or throw this, and it would tell them God's answer. And we don't know how it worked. Some people think they were like dice, but, I don't know. I think if Aaron was here, he would definitely agree with that one because he loves to roll dice all the time. But let's see. There was something I was going to bring up. Oh, it's an important idea too. When in the congregation here, if you want to be effective in doing things and trying to lead and having projects and things like this, it only makes sense to not just simply decide, well, I'm going to do it and convince everyone else to do it with me, especially when we have a hierarchy of leadership. A hierarchy now is, of course, the elders and the deacons, and it's the wise way to go for approval, because if they kind of approve it, it's there is no elder or deacon alive who has the right to tell you can't do God's work. But if you're trying to do God's work and you're trying to include other people, the smartest way to do it is go to them and get approval. And if they support it and they're approving of it, they kind of lay their hands on the situation, so to speak. It's going to be a lot easier for other people to accept the fact that, okay, this is actually something that we can do. It's not trying to take over authority. And that's a very big idea in the scriptures, and it should be for us as well. We need to be very careful that we're not just trying to take over and invent things ourselves. Now, before we had elders, it's a little bit different story, but now we have leadership. They're the ones who are, hey, let's face the facts. I know the bell rang, but let's face facts. Leadership is the promotion of ideas. And if you promote your ideas only, then what you're doing is you're assuming leadership. And so what we have to do is work together, especially with the elders, and say, what ideas should we be promoting? And then go from there. That's why we need elders who can understand the needs and see ideas and say, here's the path that we need to be going. So that's just a natural way things happen, and that's how things work. If we try things and it don't work, maybe it's because we're not trying in the right paths. But you know, that is application of that. Any other thoughts before we quit? Yes, Paul.
I want to add to that. There are people that come to me, what would you think of this idea? It's great, go do it. They can do it. They don't have to worry then about the consequences, how they've done it. They've been authority to do it.
They just blame you. Yeah, you're right. I was making fun of it, but you're right, because then it releases them from worrying about whether it's going to be people are going to be mad about it. Well, they can say, well, I have Paul's word on this. It's okay. So yeah, that's a good thought. All right. Well, thank you very much. We almost made it halfway.